Today we are breaking down the Ohio State Buckeyes and telling you what you need to know about the number 2 team in the country. Then we're talking about men's hoops. They have their first big challenge of the season coming up on Thursday. And then we've got a listener mailbag, and we've got some good questions by you, the listeners, here at Locked On Golden Gophers.
Hey, you are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator, and recruiting assistant here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We slipped up a little bit yesterday, but we will be sure to make it up to you. Now we are talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes, and as we do each and every week, we're breaking down the need-to-know players and what has been happening with the team on the Gophers schedule coming up. So this week it is Ohio State. If you've been missing those, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of that good information to know your foe. Now, on top of that, we are going to be talking about the men's hoops because they've been putting it down. They've been scoring the ball. They've been making it look like they have an offensive identity, but their first big challenge is coming up on Thursday, and we need to talk about that team and how this team can really make a name for itself, make some noise on the season. And then we're diving into that mailbag because each and every week, or at least every other week, we take mailbag questions from you, the listeners, to get what you want answered here on this show. If you have any of those questions ever, drop them in the comments on YouTube, and we will be sure to get them your way. If you're listening via audio platform, send an email at lockedongoldengophers at gmail.com, or go to Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days, and follow me at Gophers Kane Rob and send me a DM there with your questions. Now let's jump in. Let's dive into breaking down the Ohio State Buckeyes because they are the number 2 team in the country, and that speaks for itself on how great they are, especially since Michigan is the number 3 team in the country. So we already have experienced that Michigan team, and this Ohio State team is right up there with them. Now, personally, I think Michigan might be a little bit deeper, but we're going to find out one way or another this upcoming weekend for Gophers fans. Now, there have been teams that have been able to hang around with Ohio State, like Maryland hung around for a while, I believe for like 3 quarters. Wisconsin hung around for most of the game, who was also missing their starting quarterback when they played, but Ohio State has had some shaky moments. Now, those shaky moments have only been for like a quarter or a part of a quarter, as opposed to what the Gophers have seen at times for a whole half. But regardless, Ohio State has been they've dealt with injuries like to Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, 2 of their top cornerbacks, and even Marvin Harrison. But this team still finds a way to get it done, and they find a way to get it done seemingly easily or handily. They get the job done by multiple scores. So yes, this team might not be as dominant as we've seen with Justin Fields or with CJ Stroud, but they are still a force, and the defense has made up for the lack of offense. Now, when you dive into this Ohio State roster, you're looking at a quarterback who many had made comments like Kyle McCord just isn't that guy. He's not as talented. He can't get the job done, even though he hasn't lost a single game yet. But if you look at the box score, it still wouldn't be too alarming. 2,687 yards, 20 touchdowns, 4 interceptions on 66.3 completion percentage. Now, most programs in the country would absolutely take that. But with what Ohio State has seen over the last few years, you can see why fans are like, oh, he's not a superstar. He's not a big-time guy, and that's not what we're used to. We're used to Heisman level quarterbacks, Heisman level candidates here at Ohio State. So I can see where there's some upsetness, but at the same time, he is doing what you need to do to win and getting the job done. So the truth is, with these skill position players that Ohio State has, you just need to be in the same area code when it comes to throwing the ball, and they will likely go up and win the ball. So even the running back has the ability to pass catch and get it done efficiently. So I wouldn't underestimate Kyle McCord in the slightest heading into this matchup. Now, when you're looking at the running back room, TreVeyon Henderson absolutely leads the way, especially since returning from his injury. He has been a man on a mission and is possibly the best running back in this upcoming draft class if he chooses to come out. There have been some rumors out there that maybe he goes back, but with how he's turned it on in the back half of the season, I would not be surprised to see him put his name into that draft conversation, and he'd probably be the first running back taken. Now, aside from the home opener, TreVeyon Henderson has scored in every single game that he has played this season for the Ohio State Buckeyes. He's had multiple scores in a couple of games, and across his last 3 games, he's had 500 all-purpose yards and 3 touchdowns. So he can get it done through the air. He can get it done on the ground, and he is a rock-solid star running back for the Ohio State Buckeyes. But they still have depth behind him in Chip Trianum and Mayan Williams. Both of them can hold their own and have during TreVeyon's injuries, and they have 3 touchdowns apiece as well. They've also got talent below them. Dallas Hayden is a baller as well. So the running back room is deep and strong. But the best room on this team, in my opinion, is still the wide receivers, by far the biggest strength of the Ohio State Buckeyes of the past few years. You've got Chris Olave, NFL, Garrett Wilson, NFL, Jackson Smith and Jigba, NFL, Jamison Williams, only for a couple years before he transferred, still NFL. You've got maybe the most physically gifted receiver of all those guys I just named still currently with the Buckeyes in Marvin Harrison Jr. The dude is an athletic freak. He legitimately should have won the Biletnikoff last year, in my opinion, and very well could win it again this year. And his name is in the Heisman conversation, legitimately in the Heisman conversation. I've seen him as a top 4 candidate for the Heisman right now. And this season, he's got 1,063 yards and 12 touchdowns already on the year. That's still with being dinged up here and there. And that's only less than 200 yards and 2 touchdowns away from his numbers last season. Now, he's got the Gophers defense who hasn't been able to stop the passing game. And then he's got his rival in Michigan, and you know they're going to look for their guy and try to get him the ball. So he could absolutely pass his numbers from last season, and he will very likely rip the Gophers a new one. I'll be curious to see how the Gophers try and slow him down. Could we see Wally and coverage on him more often? Now, I don't believe I've ever really seen the Gophers try to shadow their better cornerback onto a star receiver, so I probably wouldn't imagine that would be done, but we'll see how much they move Marvin Harrison around on the field to give him advantageous matchups or find the holes, because that's what other teams have seemingly done to the Gophers. But beyond him, the Ohio State Buckeyes still have a true freshman in Carnell Tate, who has been balling out, Emeka Egbuka, who's been a baller when he's healthy, and then you've got Julian Fleming on top of that. All 4 of those wide receivers I have listed so far have over 200 receiving yards for the Buckeyes, and it doesn't stop there. Beyond that, they have a tight end who is the second on the team in receiving yards with 508 yards and 4 touchdowns. He will absolutely be an all Big Ten tight end this season and is currently, like I said, second in receiving production. So they've got weapons all over the field. The offense is tough to stop. The only maybe blemish is the offensive line, which has given up more sacks than normal, but they're tied for 46th in the nation with the Gophers, with 17 sacks allowed on the season. Now, the last 2 games, they've been trying to make up that, and they've only allowed 1 sack in the last 2 games. Prior to that, they had some struggles. 4 to Wisconsin, 3 to Purdue. I believe they had a couple in between there as well. So they're up and down. The offensive line isn't as dominant as we have seen in the years past, but they are still a very legitimate and good offensive line. Now, you flip it over to the defense. The defense is in its second year with Jim Knowles, and like I said, it's probably the strength of this Ohio State team, which we are not used to seeing, especially when I'm listing all of those offensive weapons they have. But they're second in pass defense, 21st in rush defense, 4th in total defense, 2nd in scoring defense, and that is all without being a rock star in the turnovers or the sacks department. 115th in turnovers gained with only 9 turnovers gained on the season, and 81st in sacks average per game. So they aren't having these game-shifting plays. They simply do their job, get off the field, and no scoring or little yardage is allowed. Now, the players you need to be aware of on that defense is Tommy Eichenberg. He's a great do-it-all linebacker, leads the team in tackles with 73 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble, and he's got a great partner in crime in Steel Chambers, who has 57 tackles, 1 pass breakup, and 1 interception. But the secondary is what has been most impressive for the Buckeyes so far this season. Burke, who is usually their starter, their kind of lockdown corner, has dealt with many injury this year, but they have still had a number of players step up. Proctor, Styles, Ransom, Burke, Hancock, All of those guys in the secondary have between 30 and 40 tackles, except for one of them, which is Burke, because he's been injured. And they have a combined 22 pass breakups and 4 interceptions. So the secondary is deep across the entire backfield. But the number one player on this defense that the Gophers need to have an eye on is JT Tuimoloau. He has 28 tackles, 4 sacks, 2 pass breakups, but he is a difference maker, plain and simple, and he definitely brings the most pressure on this team. Now, the defense, like I said, may have been the biggest strength for the number 2 team in the nation, and it could be tough sledding for Minnesota all around. But we're going to shift gears here. We're going to talk about men's hoops because they have started out hot and won convincingly, but their biggest challenge approaches on Thursday. Can they keep it up? We're going to dive in deep coming up next. First, I got to talk to you about our friends over at eBay Motors because they have got you covered. Now, winter is coming and you can winterize your vehicle with the best parts at the best prices over at eBay Motors because they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Regardless of if you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts, there are all sorts of options for you to choose from when it comes to your ride or die, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, the part is guaranteed to fit your vehicle or your money back because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the dub. Keep your ride or die alive with eBay Motors. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and the eBay Guaranteed Fit is for U.S. customers only. All right, Gophers fans, before we talk about Gophers hoops, I do want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. So if you want to know what's going on at all times, 24/7, Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering the top stories on the day-to-day basis, 24/7 with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe for the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. But let's talk about Gophers hoops specifically, and we got to talk about their next opponent, which is the Missouri Tigers. They were 47th last year in the net rankings. They were a tournament team. They were a 7 seed in the tournament, and on top of that, they won a game in the tournament. They got to the second round, but they lost to a 15-seeded Princeton team. Now, they did beat Utah State, and they were 24-9 in the regular season. So this Missouri team was very, very respectable last season. Now, they had a key rotation last year of about 7 to 8 players, and this year they still have a key rotation of about 7 players with 4 key returners from last season. Now, those 4 key returners are Sean East, Noah Carter, Nick Honor, and Aiden Shaw. And 3 of those players have absolutely just been going crazy for the Missouri Tigers this season. Sean East is their graduate player who is back, current leading scorer with 18.3 points per game and 2 assists per game. And then Noah Carter, who also played a lot on last year's team, is a senior who's averaging 13.3 points and 7.3 rebounds on the season. But Nick Honor is a name that you probably would recognize, especially if you listen to Locked On Golden Gophers, because he was a player who was considering transferring to the Gophers 2 years ago. And in that time, he has a real nice 3-point game. He consistently knocks it down. He gets 30 minutes a game for the Missouri Tigers. And last season averaged 10 points per game, 2 rebounds per game, 2 assists per game. But like I said, a nice 3-point shooter. So those 3 are very important within this rotation. And they played a ton of minutes for the team that went to the tournament last year as well. And then you've got a transfer in from Iowa State, 3-point shooter in Caleb Grill. He shoots about 5 to 6 threes per game and averages a clip of 34% so far in his career. So he's probably going to be a starter for the Tigers with those 4 players I had mentioned, all returning from last year's team. And then you've got a 6th guy, Tamar Bates, transfer from Indiana, who is a solid rotational guard for them, kind of contributes where he can and gives them good minutes. But the biggest player that I want to bring up is true freshman Anthony Robinson. He's been getting more and more time through their first 3 games. Last game, he led the team in assists with 5 assists. And as he gets more and more familiar as he gets kind of warmed up into the situation. He could see more and more time throughout this season, so he's definitely a player to watch. But the thing with the Missouri Tigers that I'm very curious about is that they've got some size on this team. They've got a 7'5" center in Vanover. Majak is 7'2", and then they've got Jordan Butler, who is a 7-foot freshman who is a forward. But only one of those three players has seen any minutes for the Missouri Tigers through their first 3 games, and that was 2 minutes in just one game, and that player was Majak. Now, Minnesota should be able to use size to their advantage, especially if Pharrell Payne is playing in this game, and that could really give the Gophers a slight advantage at home, cleaning up the boards and hopefully getting overly physical with a team that might not have the size to compete on that front. Minnesota should be able to win the battle of the boards, but Missouri is extremely dependent on their shooting. They can get hot in a quick minute. And so if they aren't knocking down their shots, if they aren't seeing the threes go in, it could be a long night for the Tigers. When they played Memphis, it was. So hopefully we'll see if Minnesota can win that battle of the boards. Not only that, it'll be a true test for Minnesota on the defensive end, which has been more of the staple of their success so far because of the length that they have as a team across the board. A lot of long players, a lot of reach to them. So if they can use their defensive length to disrupt the Tigers shooting and keep them cold, then they can possibly go on and compete in this game, maybe bring home the dub and possibly show that it can compete with the good teams and take a step up in that department as well. Now, I'm curious if the continued pace for the Gophers will continue to be quicker and the ball movement will keep going. And if it does, I think that it'll be a big step for the Gophers, especially because if it can remain in the times of struggle where the shot isn't falling or they play a better caliber opponent like we're about to see on Thursday, if they can show that, then it'll likely be the first chance for us to see that put to the test. Now, I'm also curious to see how Cam Christie, who came alive in the last game for the Gophers men's hoops, stacks up against a high major competition. He was extremely poised in his first game, knocking down many threes and very confident with his gameplay. But I think he's built for it. I don't think he's going to bat an eye when it comes to playing a high major opponent. So I'm really curious to see how he steps up on Thursday against Missouri. And it could be another major outing for him to get some more respect and some more love from Gophers Nation. Now, I'm guessing this is going to be a close game for the Gophers, and we could see the Gophers command some respect if they can pull this win out, because not only would it be a big win starting 3-0 for the Gophers, but the next 2 games should be favorable before they hit the road and go to San Francisco to play San Francisco at Oracle Arena, which would be the next challenge game. So the Gophers could start out hot. Maybe we can get on a 6-7-0 run, and that could be major for the Gophers' confidence before they take on Ohio State in their first Big Ten battle of the season. We'll keep you covered with the updates with Locked On Golden Gophers here, and we'll talk about the men's basketball team. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about what happens with tonight's North Dakota State women's basketball game as well. So be sure to hit subscribe. Be sure you're tapped in. We're talking about all of the sports that we can here at Locked On Golden Gophers. But Ben Johnson's first test of the season comes up on Thursday, and hopefully you'll be tuned in or at the barn itself when the Gophers take on Missouri. Now, to close up this show, we're going to dive into the listener mailbag, and we've got some interesting questions that we're going to dive deep into that come from you coming up next. First, I got to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 winning moneyline bet. Now, it could be more than $5 as well, but as long as you bet $5 on a moneyline bet, you will win $150 if your bet wins in bonus bets. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, especially because you've got NBA games, you got NFL games, you got college football games, you got NHL games. This is one of the best times in sports because we have so many sports going on at one time. The app is so easy to use. You can bet on player props, spreads, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and give it a shot, especially with so many sports going on. FanDuel is an official partner of Locked On and an official partner of the NFL. All right, Gophers fans, we are going to dive in the mailbag. We've got 4 questions to cover tonight that I want to get through and give them good thoughts, but we'll also keep it a quicker show for you today. Now, the first question is, in my opinion, What do I think is the biggest factors contributing to an underwhelming performance from the Gophers football team this year, especially against teams we should crush all day long? Maybe one or two things with the offense and one or two things with the defense. Now, with the offense, I think it's consistency. I think it's conservative play, especially in that second half. But what I said on Monday's show, I think is the number one thing that we've seen, especially in these Illinois and Purdue drops of the game. And actually, you could probably, we'll get to that. Illinois, Purdue games, especially in this back half, the issue has been, in my opinion, that the Gophers get hot with the script that they start out with, especially with their quarterback, and they get it going on offense. And then all of a sudden, they ask Ethan to do different things, read the field more, be more like Tanner Morgan with his reads. And that's just not what his play strength is right now. Now, I'm not saying he can't read the field at all. What I'm saying is he has been way more successful in the quick game and getting things going and having to think less, but find more quicker open reads instead of these longer developing plays where he has to make extra decisions. Well, he's not getting as much time from the offensive line, especially in the second half of these games, and things are collapsing quicker. He has less time to read. He tries to get on the run, or he sees too much pressure and he gets a sack. I think we're doing too much. We can keep it simple. And I think if we keep it simple in the second half, you keep the pass game going, you let him get the ball out of his hands quick, you let your playmakers create, like Marvin Spann-Ford, who has been getting hot over these last few games, like Daniel Jackson, who's been balling out all season. Get the ball in their hands quick and let them create. It helps him continue to build his confidence. And then that's when you see him drop a dime here or there, drop a really nice touch pass, a really nice accurate pass here or there, and that's when things really start to get going. We see it early on the scripted plays that the Gophers have practiced all week specifically for that opponent. But as the times get going, how do you keep those juices flowing without having the specific schemed stuff that you had in the first half? Plus, you could maybe run a couple more of those things until that team can prove they can stop it. That's one thing, and we talked about that on Monday. But the second thing is I think this offensive line needs to step up because we haven't been able to create as much with the run game. Now, we know that the running backs have been injured for the most part, but this offensive line hasn't been creating as many holes as what we have seen in years past. And I think that has been a major stress for the Gophers offense over the years. Now, like I said, this is a younger team. This is a team that hasn't had as much experience. So hopefully, regardless of the struggles, regardless of the disappointment from the season, it helps the Gophers get back into that category in the 2024 season. Now, I know everyone is panicking because we've got these other teams coming over, but USC and UCLA, of those four teams coming over, are the teams I am the least scared of or the least worried about when it comes to the new team coming over. And those are the two draws that the Gophers got for next year. So overall, it's not all panic, all chaos, no chances next season, but it's going to be very difficult. But if you have your young players that are getting heavy minutes right now and they're suffering from some adversity this season, but hopefully it's learning adversity that they can bring into next season. Now, flipping it to the defensive side, I think the adjustments that we make are usually pretty good, but sometimes they're really late. And on top of that, especially in this Purdue game, I think we have younger players that aren't ready to fully be on the field for as many snaps as they're seeing. But due to the injuries, we don't really have any choices. But on top of that, I just feel like there's a lack of the energy, a lack of oomph sometimes from these players. Now, when we saw Cody Lindenberg on the field, that energy wasn't a lack of. You were seeing him hitting the yup and hitting the interceptions, firing the team up, bringing the speed, bringing the energy. When he's out there, he's a difference maker, not only statistically, but he fires up the rest of his defense. And I just feel like when he's off the field, which he has been for a lot of this season, the Gophers defense just doesn't have that spark. So who can be the other players in his absence that get this thing sparked up and get this thing going and help the defense find its fire and find its passion? I think that is a big thing. This Gophers team has been missing it. And if you think about the games that he has played in, the defense has played fairly well. Now, yes, in the Illinois game, that last 2 minutes, brutal. But every moment up to then, it was like, whoa, is our defense back? Is this what we're doing? Even in the Michigan State game, this is the Gophers defense. I remember this defense, but all of a sudden he's gone again in Purdue. And what is this defense? We can't stop a nosebleed. We can't I think that is a big thing, is not only the production that he brings, but the fire that he brings to the defense, the energy where people have fun, but they also all are motivated and all have that fire lit underneath them to be in the right place at the right time, create stops, get the arm swings going and whatnot. So I think that has been a big thing. So who can step up from the younger players and keep that mantle going in his absence? Can Tyler Nubin bring some extra fire? I think he's always consistent, but sometimes he brings that energy when he creates a turnover and everybody fires up. But when he isn't having a turnover or a big play, it feels like the rest of the defense is quiet. So I feel like they have to find ways to get motivated. They have to find ways to have fun, but they have to find ways to bring the energy, because that energy has been brought before Cody Lindenberg. Mariano Sori-Marin was a player who was absolutely firing this defense up, and he was always in the heat of it all, had his head in the talks with other players and like chirping back at other players, and was also given the energy and kind of the chanting and the not taunting, but firing up his defense. So we need something like that to keep these guys going, but then also making adjustments a little bit quicker than when the Gophers are, because right now it feels like they're making them, but they're making them a step or two too late. And at that point, you're knocked out of the game, or you're already put yourself in a bad position, or what have you. So overall, I think those have been the biggest struggles for this team this year. Now, speaking of Cody Lindenberg, the second question is thoughts on the rumors that Cody Lindenberg was left out of the lineup so they could get him a medical red shirt. First off, I think he already used his medical red shirt. So overall, I think he would just be going for his normal red shirt, because he has played in every season that he has been able to, except for, I believe it was the 2020 season. I could be wrong. It could have been 2021. Actually, no, he played a lot in 2020. 2021 was where he played 1 or 2 games, got hurt, and I think they used a med red on him, and then went on to play 2022, which was last season, second on the team in tackles. And then this year, he has played 2 games so far, 2 games remaining, so he could still keep his red shirt that he has not used. It could be a possibility. I pointed out on Twitter prior to the game that he would be eligible for that red shirt now, since he wasn't playing Ohio State. Do I think that's the reason? Maybe it could have been like we should win this Purdue game. Ohio State's going to be an extreme challenge. Wisconsin's always a challenge because it's the rival. So if we're going to do it at any point, now is the game to do it. But I don't think Fleck would ever admit that. He would never say that's the reason, but it will be curious. I will be interested to see, does he play in this Ohio State game? Because that will probably fire that theory, that rumor up tenfold if he plays in these next 2 games. If he doesn't, then it's super unfortunate for the Gophers, because they really need him. But regardless, I don't think we'll ever get a straight up answer of that being the reason why it happened. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was under consideration at the time, knowing that he came back 5 games ahead, and basically you can only play 4 to keep it. So it's really ironic, really coincidental that the game in the middle of those 5 games, all of a sudden he was injured again as a questionable. Notice it wasn't out, it was questionable, but then he wasn't dressed. So I'll be curious to see if he suits up for the next 2 games. If so, then maybe I wouldn't be surprised, but we'll never get a straightforward answer with that one. Next question, still football related, but I like the direction they went. The Gophers women's basketball team went in and paid for a great standing head coach. It's time for the Gophers football. Is it time for Gophers football to let Fleck go and maybe go grab someone like a Jimbo Fisher or a big name coach? I do love what the Gophers women's basketball team did, but you got to think back to, will the coach stay? Will the coach come here and be a part of the long-term solution? Because yes, the Gophers went out and paid Dawn Plitzaway, but Dawn Plitzaway also has so many ties to the Midwest. Her success prior had been a lot of Midwest schools, South Dakota especially, where she had built that up. She had recruiting routes in South Dakota, in Minnesota, in North Dakota, in Wisconsin, because of her ties to the Midwest, because of the program she's grown up in the Midwest. The program that she had success with was in the Midwest. So everything was tied to the Midwest. She's from Wisconsin, so she's right next door, closer to her parents. There was a draw for her to stay here, not for 3 to 4 years and have some success and find another job or find a bigger fish, but because she wants to be here and really dive in deep, set roots, and make this a big thing. That is the reason the Gophers really went out to pay Coach Don Plitzway. And right now, that's what it feels like Coach Fleck wants to do, is be here for the long term. Now, he's been here through 7 years, and I still think the thing, this is year 7 and this is what we're seeing, is a weird phrase because players turn over basically after 4 to 5 years. But with the COVID year especially, it has given us an extra year or so. Now, we felt the pain in the departures of that this past offseason into this season. You're bound to have some little drop off or some little loss of production when you have really good classes that carry you. And once those guys start to grow out, whether it's graduating from school or whether it be going to the NFL, you're going to have a year or two where you have hiccups. But the thing is, they're playing so many young players right now that hopefully we don't have those hiccups next year. And hopefully they add some transfer depth. And hopefully some of the younger players from the 23 class and the 24 class are able to funnel in and get some time next year. So we have more younger players that are ready to keep this thing moving and have success in year 8 and year 9. But we'll see what happens with that, if there will even be a year 8 and year 9. But to answer the actual question, like someone like a Jimbo Fisher, I would be very cautious with what we ask for, because Jimbo Fisher could come here and he could bring some really high named recruits. Maybe he keeps some Texas recruits coming this way. It's still tougher because in Texas they want to stay home. Coming up to the cold of Minnesota is a completely different thing. So I'm not sure that big name coach is going to still have the draw in recruiting to bring up big name players up this way. And on top of that, Jimbo Fisher wasn't getting the winning done in the SEC. So what makes you think that it's going to be better right away from the jump? Now, the philosophies might be different, and that might be what people are really calling for, is a change in philosophies, which is why I want a big change when it comes to how this offense is run moving forward. We'll see if that even happens, but I think that I would be more afraid of that bigger fish, that bigger name coming here, doing really well. But once they have that 11-2 season, once they have that big season like we saw in 2019, they're outie. They're outie 5,000, ready to go. What's the next big job? I'm going back to the SEC. I want a bigger player in the Big Ten, and they're taking that opportunity the second they can. It doesn't feel like that's happening with Coach Fleck. It feels like he's set roots. He's moved to a bigger house here. He's been more involved in the community. And so those are the things that you kind of have to weigh as an athletic director when you're looking at those coaching decisions. Now, the final question, I know I got a little long on these, but with very early success from the Gophers basketball programs, are they for real? It's a great question, and we're going to have the answer to that question this week for both programs. The women's team should hopefully be able to go out there and beat North Dakota State tonight, and that'll be a big one. They lost to the team last year, but they also didn't have Mara Braun on the court last year for that matchup. I think they should win that one pretty handily. But then you you stay at home, but you have UConn, a ranked team, coming in on Sunday. That's going to be your barometer. That's going to tell you how serious this Gophers team could be. If they're hanging with UConn all game, get excited, get ready, because it could be a crazy fun year. Now, if they struggle with UConn and UConn absolutely puts them to sleep, it might be a little bit more concerning, but it still doesn't set off red flags or anything like that. It just tells you this team isn't ready as young as early as it is into learning Coach P's style and everything like that to hang with the big dogs. But if they hang with the big dogs right away from jump in the third week of games, get ready. And then with the men's basketball team, you've got Missouri, who was a tournament team, 47th in net ranking last year, like we talked about earlier in the show. And it'll be the first test for the Gophers as they continue to try and prove that year 3 will be different. That's going to do it for us on today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry it's a little bit longer, but I got to make sure to get to your listener questions and get them all answered here at Locked On Golden Gophers. If you have future questions, drop them in the comments below as always, and we'll get them on a future mailbag. Until then, row the boat, Sky Go Gophers, and as always, don't forget to subscribe.